My story that I'm about to tell you started 7,500 years ago. It started when I was 13 years old. It started with 2 chocolate bars, the sarcophagus of a Phoenician king, and children that scribbled on the beach and died for it. Last year, I published Age of the Seer, book 1 in a series of 10 books I wrote over a period of 14 years. Collectively, these 10 books tell the high fantasy adventure of Ahiram, a high fantasy with 65 kingdoms, hundreds of characters, and battles so wide they can only fit on a screen of your imagination. When I wrote the epic, there was one little fact I was not aware of. Did you know that if you go to Amazon and you search for high fantasy books, like The Lord of the Rings, for instance, Amazon will hit you back with 17,861 titles. 17,861 titles. I just want you to picture a library with 17,000 books. How many would you spend on any one of them? How many would you read? According to an article in Publishers Weekly by Chris Anderson, figures from 2004 tells us that books published in the United States, on average, would sell 500 copies. And that only 2% of 1.2 million titles sold more than 5,000 copies. 2%. This then might lead you, and rightfully so, to wonder what would provoke a man who holds a full-time job and has a family life he cares deeply about to spend 14 years writing 10 books he hopes to publish in a sea of 17,000 books. Yeah. Maybe I should take you back to the beginning, to that one singular event that started it all. Now here's a question for you. How many of you have walked into a living, breathing, modern city which is 7,500 years old? I have, and so did my kids. Byblos of Lebanon is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world. When Jesus walked in the district of Sidon and Tyre, 2 other cities of Lebanon, Byblos was already very, very old. The Phoenicians called it Jubail, which means little mount, because it's built on a little hill. It was the Greeks who called it Byblos, book, because according to the historian Herodotus, the Phoenicians who came to Greece with Cadmus brought with them many achievements, the greatest of which was the art of writing, the alphabet. Back then, I was 13 years old on a field trip, school field trip to Byblos. And I must confess, I was far more interested in the 2 chocolate bars that were in my friend Ranya's backpack than I was in the Age of the City. Rania was sitting in front of me, and I had reached a trembling hand inside her bag, and my hand wasn't shaking because of fear or guilt, unfortunately. It was shaking because the prehistoric bus, taking us there was older than the city itself. It moaned and creaked like a man who had lost the love of his life at the dentist. I was so focused on those 2 chocolate bars, I did not notice the bus was slowing down. "Everyone out of the bus!" shouted the driver, trying to wake up the dead. I panicked, yanked my hand back, brought the pack back with me, landed on my lap. Yeah, Rania turned around and saw the word guilty written in big, bold fonts on my forehead. Guilty. She looked at me, a glint in her hazel eyes, and said, "You wanted my chocolate bars? You could have asked for them, you know." And just like that, she gave them to me. Now, the tour of the city was actually interesting, enough to keep a 13-year-old boy's mind off food for about an hour. The guide rattled a long list of civilizations that had conquered Byblos and then showed us the spot where the sarcophagus of King Ahiram had been excavated. On this sarcophagus, he told us, is found one of the oldest alphabetical inscriptions known to the world. And you can see it on the top of the cover. The Phoenicians' alphabet, he added, is a world's treasure. Now, in my chocolate-craved mind, the words king and treasure connected. If the alphabet is a treasure to be discovered, surely it needed a king to discover it. And with a presidential stroke, I concluded Ahiram discovered the alphabet. Later that day, I stood on the beach of Byblos on the Mediterranean, and I looked out into the sea. And as I looked out, I saw waves after waves of children reaching to the dawn of time across millennia, who stood where I was standing, saw what I was seeing, and played where I longed to play. And just like that, I met him. I mean Ahiram. He was on his daily run back to his hometown, and he stopped and then looked at the 2 chocolate bars I was still holding in my hand and asked me what were those inscriptions on them. And I told him, this is writing. He sighed and said, you see these children, none of them can write. Of course, I added rather pompously. Gutenberg had not yet invented the printing press. What's wrong with you? These children cannot write because writing is a high magic evil. If any one of them is caught writing, he will be put to death and his village destroyed. Really? Wow, I did not know that. You don't know that? Now look, I just flunked my test on the Medo-Persian conquest. History eludes me. This is not history. This is high fantasy. Your fantasy. I'm just a character in your head. As he sprinted away, I saw him drag a storm behind him. Storm Rider, I wondered, what would your story be? In a world where high magic, romance, mystery, and politics weave a landscape as complex as the Middle East itself, as twisted as its tortured history, but filled with the brilliance of Byblos, with the hope welling from a city that is 7,500 years old, a city that had seen 7,500 years of greed, ambition, and violence, and yet a city that laid peacefully on the beautiful shores of my Mediterranean and never ceases to proclaim, I endure, and so must you. But now life, you know, is never a linear thing. Its twists are like needle points ornamenting the tapestry of our imagination. War came to Lebanon and war came to Byblos as it did over millennia. And my family immigrated to France. And I landed on the Champs-Élysées like Alibaba on a flying carpet. Translation, I did not fit in. But you know what? I loved Paris. I just loved Paris. And I worked at it really hard. And after 3 years, I transmogrified into a bona fide Parisian. And I walked the city. I walked with Jean Valjean. I sang with Cosette. I'm not going to sing for you right now. I argued with Chopin over Georges Sand, but mainly I went to Notre Dame and I would sit with Quasimodo, the hunchback of Notre Dame. He was still waiting for his Esmeralda. And when she finally came, she brought with her 2 chocolate bars. Still, life intruded again and said, onward ho. And my family continued its peregrination to the Canadian shores. So I landed in Montreal. Meanwhile, Ahiram had actually gone into exile. He was sold as a slave, and he explained to his master why he didn't want to stay a slave and why he wanted to go back to these shores of innocence that were now hidden behind clouds of darkness. Commander Tanios, he said, my father used to say, you either kill a shark or you set him free. But to cage a shark is sheer cruelty, and I cannot live in a cage anymore. As for me, I walked Montreal in the summer and in the winter. And I learned English. For real. I became friends with David Copperfield, and he and I would go to a glass menagerie, sip coffee, while watching the Batman and the Joker duke it out with the grapes of wrath. By now, the epic had taken on a multicultural, multi-world view because it had left the shores of Lebanon without ever losing its Lebanese identity. It was still in my head. But then life took me in a different direction. I parted with Ahiram. He lay in my imagination like a sarcophagus in the depth of the earth. I completed a PhD in computer science. And eventually, my wife and I, with our two adorable daughters, one of whom is sitting right here, came down to San Diego. Now, if you come from Montreal to San Diego, you feel, I think many of you would know the feeling, you're in an eternal resort, right? That's how it felt to us. And we loved it. We loved it being there. And we love to go and walk in Seaport Village. I still do. I still love walk in Seaport Village. It's a beautiful place to walk. And while there, sitting at a cafe in Seaport Village, my wife came back and brought with her 2 coffees and 2 chocolate bars. And just like that, Ahiram came running by again, much older now. He stood by me and said, "When are you going to tell our story? When will you light the skies with our songs? The world knows us by the monochromatic images of television. Blown up buildings, screaming children, and terrorists. Did Rania give you those 2 chocolate bars for nothing? Have you learned nothing?" Aside from the fact that it was kind of mildly irritating and somewhat embarrassing to be lectured by a character that lives in your head, my wife was wondering what was wrong with me. I had to admit he had made a point. You see, the Middle East and Lebanon are like an amazing Arabian Christmas tree. But somebody has pulled the plug, and all we see are bullets sprawled on the floor like dead needles. So then I spent 14 years of my life writing this epic. Initially, I wanted to write a trilogy because that's what you do. The story took a life on its own, and it became 10 books. And then I spent 2 years proudly collecting rejection letters from agents. And last year, a miracle happened. My wife and my daughter told me we are going to self-publish the first book. And then the 3 of us became a team of 15, and now a team of 20. And the team of 20 has been volunteering their time and effort for over a year to help publish the book. We're producing a CD of songs. We've done a Kickstarter campaign that was successful. There is a whole marketing program that is being run, all volunteers. And I have no idea how that happened. But it's happening, and it's amazing. And in a span of 3 months, we've sold 2,200 copies, which for us is a great start. We're on our way to our target, which is 5,000. And the second book is coming in September. You see, this seemingly insignificant act of kindness that Rania did me when I was in that bus, when she gave me those 2 chocolate bars, kindled in my heart a great hope. And it's this hope that kept that story alive, this hope that made it a reality. And today it is hope that moves us on, hope that animates us, and it is hope that will bring us home. Thank you for listening.